our least favorite part of the process. You mentioned editing.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, it's kind of two sides to it for me. In terms of just pure writing, like if I'm just writing a story, editing is the least favorite part for me. And I guess, and for the YouTube, it's like more for the game collection side, the footage collection side. You know, I have to get specific shots to go with whatever I'm saying. I guess I mentioned both of them together because they're both. I think the reason they're both so like my least favorite part for me is because they're kind of the more restrictive parts, I guess, in the sense that you know when you're writing a story, you can just go wherever with it. Whereas, but basically with editing and stuff, it's just more of the more technical side, which is quite boring to me. Like having to check out I didn't make any grammar mistakes and stuff like that. It's less. It's no longer using the imagination side that it makes creation so fun. It's just more the boring technical side, which is why that's my least favorite part.
Yeah. John, what's yours?
My least favorite part of the creative process historically has been being getting criticism. Not like oh, this is shit, but like presenting something to someone and having them look over it and then giving you so much feedback it makes you feel like you didn't do a good job at all, or they're like, well, you need to work on this, and this. And I'm like, I think as creatives, I think we all kind of have an ego about our work. So
yeah,
I remember at one of my creative writing classes, I was just like really petty about this feedback I got. It was a story about a skeleton joining a camp, like a bunch of campers around a bonfire, and the skeleton was like dug up by a camper that they found it earlier in the day, and then the skeleton like put on a fake mustache and joined them at the campsite, and everyone was like, whoa, we've never seen this skeleton before, and like there's a lot of things that didn't make sense, but that's what I was doing on purpose. But like my instructor was like, he gave me all this feedback and he was like, this doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't anyone think the skeleton was who he was just because he had a mustache on?
Yeah.
And,
that's
so
really
it's so I went back and I revised it and pointed out everything. I was like, well, it's a mustache because that's just it was his disguise, and historically in like old cartoons that Bugs Bunny would put on a dress, and no one would know it was Bugs Bunny. It was some other entity, and so I explained everything. And my professor the next day was like, "Yeah, I need to talk to you."
It's really difficult because it's pretty much to me like a balance. It's like kind of like that balance between objectiveness and subjectiveness. Shout out to Box again.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's always a case to there's some things like for example, someone gave me advice like on one of my videos, I accidentally put the gain on my microphone too high, and like that I learned from that and improved my videos. But there's some stuff where it's more of a preference thing. So like for example, if like some people would just prefer like a very serious video, very serious documentary, whereas someone like myself prefers that to be infused with some comedy. But it's very difficult to walk that line between someone just not liking your style and your style being bad. So it's difficult to try and it can be kind of a thing to figure out, okay, is my style just generally bad, or do I just this person just happened to not click on my style?
Yeah, I mean, I remember in that class, they a bunch of other students had short stories about like, this girl battling depression, and then this other person was like working at a soup kitchen, and so it was like all like dark tone type stuff, and then my dumbass short story thrown in the middle of it all,
Yeah, that's something that bugs me. Like, especially with science fiction nowadays. Most science fiction is like really dark and moody and everything, and it seems that any like actual light-hearted stuff, like Star Trek, for example, shows that are like Star Trek in tone. are kind of shunned more in a way because dark, moody stuff is seen as more mature, I guess, and stuff like that. It's it's an annoying phenomenon to me.
Yeah, it's like a reason that like comedy doesn't really have any recognition at the Oscars.
Yeah, that is interesting.
And same with animation as well. Animation's always shafted in that respect. It's always animation's always seen as like a kids thing for some reason.
Mm-hmm. There's such depth in a lot of animation, and I just shake my head and bite my tongue when I hear people just trashing it. It's like, oh, it's just for kids. Why are you watching a cartoon? It's like, no, not really. It's not. Like, you can, that's a whole different podcast topic right there.
Yeah, like one thing I saw on Twitter recently was Eric Cartman from South Park.
Yeah.
I saw people saying that like South Park promotes anti-Semitism because Cartman's always saying, "Oh, you stupid Jew" and everything. Like that's the whole point. Cartman's a bad guy. Like we've seen to really lost nuance in a way with creativity now. Like I know now so many, any show with like so many characters like that. People always don't see it as that character being bad. They view it as the show endorsing these views,
Right.
and that's something that really bugs me, and something I've noticed has kind of increased in a way, with social media and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So you would argue that we should separate art from the artist?
That's not necessarily like what I'm saying is like people are viewing Cartman, for example, as like the creators, like that as them using Cartman to share their views, completely overlooking the fact that Cartman is always portrayed as the bad guy.
Yeah, that's just his character. Yeah,
exactly. Right. Yeah,
that's not necessarily the views of Matt and Trey.
Okay, especially in music, because I believe Matt Stone is Jewish, so I doubt he's going to be anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. It's kind of gone off topic a bit, a bit of a tangent, but it's interesting, like spring off point, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think tangents can be interesting to listen to for sure.
Yeah.
What about you, Caden? Was your least favorite?
As long as we don't talk about Eminem.
Yeah, there we go.
There it is.
My least favorite part of the process. Well, when Josh said editing, I definitely relate to that. I kind of am peeved by editing, or I kind of low key like afraid of it and don't want to go there. But as far as like least favorite part, what I can think of, and I think this does get better with time, but I mentioned this in the chat I think last week or two, is handling the gap between the story and characters that are in your head and the story and characters that end up coming out on the page. I think I would say struggling with that gap is my least favorite part, because I feel like for people, everything is perfect in their head. But then once you get it down on paper, you see how flawed it is. Your inner critic comes out and bashes it very easily. And is just like grappling with that, to me, is sometimes, I don't know, exhausting and like mind numbing.
Yeah, I like that thought a lot. Yeah, because like a lot of all these characters we've spent, possibly even months, fleshing out in our head all the little nuances of them. So then trying to kind of present that can be a task, because it's difficult to talk. Because when you want to show like their defining traits, but avoid like them being a caricature, and then you got to manage that element of how what pace do you slowly slow all the different sides of their character without it seeming too abrupt and that kind of thing. It's definitely a lot to it that you need to manage and work out.
Yeah, and unless they're like actually like a godly being, like they're not going to be perfect, but in your head they're like this great character, but they have to be flawed in some ways.
Yeah. I think also like specific.
Sorry, yeah. I just want to say that kind of. I think. Yes, go on. Yeah, you say yours.
You want me to go? Okay. I think specifically. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I mentioned characters obviously, and you guys jumped on, which I agree. I think also specifically a notable example I noticed for me personally. I can think of at least one example of something I wrote, but I noticed I definitely that gap is pronounced. Like it's quite pronounced when it comes to action scenes, at least for me, especially screenplay, which maybe should be easier, but it's like I can like visualize some like, let's say, violence. It sounds bad, but like some sort of action going on in my head within the story. But when I go to write it, it's so hard to make sure it reads as exciting as it is in my head. That's really tough.
100%, yeah. That's especially the case with novels and short stories and whatnot, because without that visual element, it's even harder because like what sounds really amazing in your head can just be really boring to read. That's why often with novels, fight scenes usually just focus more on the thoughts of the characters rather than the actual fighting. It's just it's a difficult balance. I think as well, it just kind of ties back to what I was saying just then as well in regards to how like. Yeah, we seem to be losing nuance. It's like when we're talking about fleshing out characters, it seems to be losing nuance in the sense that people perceive a character like a face value nowadays rather than exploring that nuance.
I had a question when you were first talking about putting your characters from your head down onto the page, but it slipped my mind. Like I was gonna ask, like, were you talking about, like you have an image of your character? Are you talking about getting that character onto the page just the way it is in your head? Like, is it a problem of transferring it, or is it a problem of giving your character flaws and seeing a 360 view of that character?
I would say transferring it.
Okay.
Like meaning whatever I see in my head, especially for screenwriting. I don't know. I feel like I'm still struggling with like prose and all writing or short stories rather, but especially for like screenwriting, like when I guess novels too. But when you read like a line or a paragraph, it's the best writing would be you can immediately like conjure up your own image of it, or just conjure up an image of it rather. Like it should read very visual for scripts. So it's like in my head, I can see that visual. It's about making the words that I put on paper as true to that as possible. And I mean, there's literally probably millions of combinations of words you can choose for that. But it's about choosing the right ones.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Sometimes when I'm writing, I have the perfect image in my head, but my hand can't write it down quick enough. And I get almost flustered because of it, because I just want to like zap it onto the page, just the way it is in my head. But like my mind goes too quickly, and then sometimes I end up losing a lot of thoughts.
Right.
With YouTube, it's kind of the other way around, because I'll often like have like a sequence planned out in my head, which like I love in my head. But then trying to find the exact gameplay footage which presents that well is really difficult, because there's so many games and so many parts you have to find specific parts of, and that can be a problem.
That's gotta be fun. You said you hate gathering all the visuals for your.
Yeah, see, that's one of the reasons why that's my least favorite part of the video making process.
Yeah, I think it'd be a lot of fun. I think I'd have fun doing that, but it's probably really tedious.
Yeah, it fluctuates. So like some sequences are really fun, and it's so satisfying when you find like a perfect shot for it. But then there's also parts where you're trying to find like a really just where there's not. There's a part where there's not really much to work with, so you just have to find like a mundane shot. But just trying to find that specific thing is difficult. So yeah.